Namaste and in Laket. I am Zen Benefiel, your host of One World in a New World. And this week's guest, among the greatest possibilities ever, is a woman named Dr. Janice Campbell, who's got amazing insight and intuitive notions about how we're progressing and what we can do with that, as she is an expert at naming the elephants in the room and transcending them. So I'd like to welcome her, and we'll be right back in a minute because you're going to want to hear this, and we still have to hear from ourselves. Hmm. Janice, it is such a wonderful opportunity to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you. It's been a bit since we'd had a chat, and I was looking forward to having another one. So thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, and this one we even record, so it can ripple, right? Because
Yep.
we come up with some pretty cool observations and insights and things like that.
Mhm.
As part of well, how we originally met was through the octopus movement. We're
Yep.
both octopi,
Mhm.
and which gives us a little different bent on life because the octopus movement is all about nonlinear thinking. Now, life really is nonlinear, and to believe it otherwise is generally engaging in folly. Would you agree?
Yes. Well, not only that, but it's just not as much fun.
Exactly. Exactly. So our conversations focus around the initial inner development and how you get in touch with that, let's call it a body sense, if you will, of energy and whether it's a voice or a vision or a sense or whatever it is. Many have it in varied ways, and we often speak of it similarly, yet through our unique perspective. And so we're often bereft of those kinds of conversations in the outer world because
Yep.
we're often deemed crazy, insane, weird, all that kind of stuff. And people kind of distance themselves because they're uncomfortable. And as you know, uncomfort kind of makes people want to walk away. Now, how do we make it more comfortable? Because it's obvious throughout history, this is a key point in finding ourselves and being able to operate in the world with some kind of efficacy. So how did you first begin? Because I know with your work and the natural healing arts and acupuncture and the herbology and these kinds of things, you really have studied and know a great deal outside of the allopathic side, which is
Right.
much different.
Mhm. Right.
So how did you first get in touch with your inner self and what was that like?
That's a good question. Um, I mean, my first response is to say that we all start out connected, when we're small.
Hmm.
And I had at the time I thought burden, and in retrospect, I consider it a gift. Being 12 years behind all of my siblings, I had a lot of uh, I had a lot of alone time, particularly in the summer when we would go back to our farm in Georgia and there weren't any other kids for miles around.
Hmm.
Um, that coupled with the fact that I always had elders in the house with me. My parents were older, the same age as the grandparents of my friends, and I had my grandparents, which were even older, in the house with us. And so the perspectives coming through them were very, they had a lifetime of wisdom
Well,
that they
sure.
were
The
carrying
insight
around.
and
Right.
wisdom that they had already just from
Right.
living and talking about it amongst each other,
Right.
being a fly on the wall is precious in that case, right?
Yeah. Well,
Or
and
a
particularly
child
be,
in the middle.
yeah, particularly being, generations young, technically generations younger, right?
Yeah,
And and so I had a lot of I was my own best companion for a good part of my childhood, and continue to be.
sure.
I could get
Well,
along
and
well
our
in here.
companion's important,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. And um, so that's sort of the seed of everything that came after it. I mean, my first career, I was theatrical stage manager and um, was working so much that I mean, 60 to 80 hours a week, 6 days a week.
Hmm.
um, that I kind of pulled away from it, put away from my inner work a little bit. And what eventually led me to change careers was the fact that I knew that that void was there.
Sure.
Um,
Well, as a stage manager, though, I was one temporarily working for a
mhm.
performing arts center, and wow, the things that you must pay attention to,
Yes, yes,
it
like
draws
time.
you out.
Mhm.
There's very little time to sit and ponder or hit the pause button because it is such rapid pace
Yeah.
activity.
Well, and the thing that I actually miss most from stage managing is there were two things. One, there was always a break during before the preview where everybody would kind of go their own way and settle before the preview performance. And I
Hmm.
would go lay in the company booth in the dark by myself and ground. And but that and at the end of the show, at the end of the night, standing on a stage, particularly the last theater that I worked in was the Children's Theater Company in Minneapolis, which is a 750 seat house and does some
Hmm.
of the biggest magic outside of New York and LA. And um, and they have an actual hemp fly loft and an orchestra pit. And so I would stand in pitch black darkness with, everything would be off and I'd be shutting down the theater and I'd be about to turn on the ghost light. And I would stand in this pitch black darkness where I could not see my hand in front of my face. And I could feel the orchestra pit below me and I could feel the fly loft above me. And everything would just slough off of me in a way that all the little details, all the little irritations, all the external things pulling at me.
Yeah.
And that was probably the
As
only
you
time I
step
felt
into the zone.
right. And the only time I felt that since then was several years ago when I was in Egypt. A friend of my sister's took us out to float on the Nile in the dark
Hmm.
on a night when there was a moon, and it was but a very very tiny moon, and it was that same sense of being connected to that great stillness and that great um quiet, that potential energy as opposed to the
Yeah, the
activity.
nothingness.
Yeah, the nothingness that's everything, right?
Great.
And and so I guess in answer to your question, I'm beginning to ramble, but in answer to your
Not at
question,
all. Not at all.
it's
You're sequential.
yeah, it's I don't know that I began that connection ever. I feel like it's been a continuity with me.
Kind of
It's
always been
just
there. You just
become
begin
more and
to
more
recognize it over
right,
time.
and it's
Yeah.
become more and more part of my work. And that's
Isn't
a
it
huge
supposed to?
oh, completely. Completely. I would think that's true. And um a lot of the work that I do, particularly with people who do a lot of computer work and a lot of online engagement, um, I help people get back into that inner quiet, into that inner space of of connection to themselves, but also proprioceptorally to others around them and to
Mhm.
nature itself.
Well, it's all
And
that energy, right?
oh,
And
completely.
physical form really has nothing to do with it. It's the
Right.
sensitivity. I came upon the notion some time ago that we can't think our way through a system built on vibrations. We've got to sense our way through.
Correct.
And there's all kinds of data now that backs that up
Mhm.
from science as well as spirituality. I think it's been around in spirituality for millennia.
Yeah.
And yet it hadn't really been fully understood because it was more faith-based, right?
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
activity, um, and a willingness to explore. And now there's science to back it up with the quantum theories and everything that it's really a great time to be alive to see this merging taking place.
Mhm.
Now,
Absolutely.
back to
I go ahead.
Oh,
Yeah.
I was going to go back to a question.
Oh,
And I know
oh,
our comments, we just kind of roll into stuff, right? So to keep it somewhat focused,
yes.
um, tangentialist we are. In that, in your early years, in the transition between the teens and young adult period of your life, how did you notice these connections or this connection and its reflection in the activity that you were doing? Because a lot of folks, and a lot of our audience, there's 70%, over 70% of our audience is below 40. So as they're developing and looking for ways to be more of themselves, right?
Mhm.
How did that process work for you in that transition period? Because as a teen, we traditionally, it's like, oh my God, what am I going to do?
Right,
Right.
right,
And then for the next few years, we explore. Some people jump right into something thinking it's going to be the way, and 20 years later find out it's not. Right.
right.
And so what was that? Because your life has flowed from one thing to another and been exciting for you, which is
Mhm.
really what we desire, right?
Yeah. Well, the impetus for practically everything I've done has been curiosity. And so it's like, ooh, what's that? Um, the big lesson for me that began at, in that transition and then carried on up until I was about 30 was the understanding that just because I can do something doesn't mean I should.
Why
Um,
should you do something well, what you shouldn't be doing at all?
correct. And and part of that is because right, and rightly so, at that point in
Mm,
your life, there's the life is this smorgasbord and you can pick any number of things, right?
yeah,
And often people have skills or are able to pull off looking like they have skills in a variety of different
sure.
areas and not
Or I don't know if I can do that, but I think I can do this.
right, exactly. But there's also that it's oftentimes it becomes an external impetus. You'd be
Mm.
good at such and such, and you're like, okay, I'll go do such and such.
Right. We
And
listen to others based on their reflections of us and never really turn in to figure out who or what we are and where we resonate or not.
correct, correct. And I was blown by that a lot during that time. I actually, and this is a story for another time, but I like to say I was kidnapped into becoming a stage manager. I was originally planning to become a scenic artist. Um, and I could always find within what I was doing something that I found fascinating or something that I found really fun or which then led to a growth for me.
Mhm.
Um,
The
and
curiosities.
yeah, and it's funny because people are like, okay, so you went from theater to acupuncture to academia to now you do some this online work and have this corporate offering. And how did that sounds like a hodgepodge of things. And for me, it's very oddly enough linear in that it all was a paring away of skills and experiences
Sure.
that were
Well, it's like a
shaped in this.
scattergram that has, the average that
Mhm.
that you take and go through it, and it becomes a line, right?
Sure.
Even though all the activity is nonlinear,
Mhm.
there's still that progression.
Well, and I was just talking to one of my clients is in her mid to late 20s, and
Hmm.
she's in that space of, I've got this job, I'm paying my bills, I don't know what I want to do. These are the things I'm interested in. I can't, you know. And it's the analogy that I used in talking to her is it's life is too short to be wearing uncomfortable shoes. And you need
For
you,
sure.
and you need my recommendation is always to try things on. People feel like they have to like leap in and commit 100% to something right out of the gate, and then if it fails, everything goes to hell in a handbasket.
Sure.
But if you try things on, then like what would it feel like? Not what if one day I was this? What if one day I was a contract electrician? Whatever. Instead of looking at it as something way in the future and that fictitious timeline that might happen,
Hmm.
put yourself in the space of what if right now in this moment I was a contract electrician? What would it feel like in my body to know that after I finish eating lunch, I'm going to go crawling around in somebody's attic and pull wire? What will it feel like if right this moment I'm going to be on a construction site on my knees all day? you know
Hmm.
what you know and what would I find fascinating about that? What would I not? What does it feel like in my body right now? Because
Hmm.
our bodies are how we, if you look at a small child, our um their whole body is hungry, their whole body is angry, their whole body is happy. They fall
Sure.
down, they skin their knee, they cry while it hurts, they move on. You ask them about it later and
They
they
are
say,
so totally in the moment.
yeah. And you ask them about it later and they're like, I have this cool band-aid. Look, but let me show you what I'm doing.
Right.
You know, and
Yeah.
and it's that smooth flow of chi. It's that being present to things as they happen. And what it is your whole body, their whole body is responding to things. And as we get older, we begin to make the separation between what our body tells us, like, I don't want to eat the rest of this, but you do. I don't
Mhm.
want to go into this situation, but you do. You know, and we
It's
start
that body brain adversarial conversation, right?
correct, and we start also taking on stories. We take on taking on words. Um, when a baby is happy, their whole body is happy, and somebody says to them, "Oh, aren't you happy?" And then suddenly they get the word happy to attach to this full body
Yeah.
situation.
And then as an adult, it's why are you so happy?
Right, right, right. But that's also why people who are raised in abusive or neglective situations have strange definitions for words like love and safety and
Oh,
happiness.
absolutely. And we don't often think, a great point, and thank you for making that, because there is this disparity amongst the population of what love means. And it
Mhm,
comes through experience. As a child, if you've got the traumatic environments, you're going to experience love as being in trauma.
mhm. Very
Whereas
possibly,
if
yeah.
and so that's going to permeate in patterns through the rest of your life because that's what you know. And so you're going to create that unconsciously. And, quoting Young, it's the time to make the unconscious conscious.
Right. Well, and that's why I bring people back to being at home in their bodies, because then they have the whole descriptive thing without the words. They have
Mhm.
the full body understanding of how they feel about a
Right. It's
situation or
sensory.
where they
As
are.
I said before, it's that sensing through it rather than thinking through it.
Correct.
Because you can
And
force anything
mhm,
with your mind.
right.
However, do you really want to push and pull energy your entire life? Aren't you really looking for flow?
Hmm. And it's also exhausting to do it that way.
Yeah.
It's I mean, part of the reason I've moved into this offering this corporate work of coming in and like at a large corporate event and bringing everybody present into their bodies. They will not spend the first 45 minutes saying, you know, I should have worn different shoes. I wish I was sitting closer to my boss. What are we having for lunch? All those things. But they
Right.
will be there and they will be able to ingest the information more readily. They'll be able to substantively contribute to
Mhm.
the conversation if need be. It will be more meaningful for them.
And
And
you
then
bring
at the
up
same
another
time,
good point.
yeah,
I'm sorry, go ahead,
well, I was
finish
gonna say,
that.
and then at the same time, once I've once I've got them to ground there, I connect them proprioceptorally to everyone else in the room so that they are aware that they are not isolated, that they are in that as an amoeba of that
Mhm.
organization.
Define
And
proceptorally. That
it's
may be that,
yeah, sure. It's a really simple thing is if I came up behind you and put my hand about this far away from your back, you would know it's there. You would know it's the sense of another living
Mhm.
being
So
in your being.
proprioception then is the sensing of energy that one emits, not
Hmm.
not the physical.
Right. And of presence.
Right.
And so becoming aware of being part of a larger, in a mycelium of humans, as
Mhm.
we say in the octopus movement,
Right.
um, allows people to not expend all their own resources. It becomes greater than the sum of its parts. And
Mhm.
so
So what does
connecting
your
people
psyllium say in that situation?
with in which
Hey, we're
situation?
talking about mycelium. What
Yeah,
about
yeah.
your psyllium?
Right,
Or are
right,
we just psyllium?
right, right. And it also it also removes the othering of people,
Yes.
because when you realize that you're connected, even if it's just in a work situation, but also in a family or wherever,
Mhm.
that you, the other person is no longer other.
Right.
Um, in a way
And
that
the
they would.
other meaning that we keep people outside of our field and
Right.
often have bias or some kind of prejudice that puts them in a place that they may not be and
Correct.
probably aren't.
Correct. And well, and you'll see it in, like, say you were in an urgent situation, you'll see it. You'll see the mycelium kick in, because the first thing in a trauma response that people do is they look to someone else.
Mhm.
They look to community, and they
There's the
connect.
elephant in the room, right?
Exactly. They connect to everybody else in the room. You
Yeah.
know,
What should
if
I
you're in
do?
a meeting and there's a big boom outside, everybody looks to each other first to make sure that the team is all, to see the connection. And then
Hmm.
you are a group that is dealing with the boom that happened outside. And different people take on different roles, and it moves
Almost an
from there. But
instant synergy that then kind
yeah,
of like in D. Hock's practice with Visa when he first started up and collecting people with skill sets and turning them loose without any hierarchical management whatsoever.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's true, but we instinctively may acknowledge the connection when we're
Right.
under threat. But there's
So,
what if the world was instinctively acknowledging the connection when we're not under threat?
well, yeah,
You
okay,
know?
great segue for this question. What do you see as trending coming out of the last event that we had that created a global impact and an obsession on self-hygiene and sequestration?
Yes. Well, I think one of the things that's been really um, refreshing to watch
Hmm.
is that there is an understanding that we are more than what we do. There is we are more than the job that we do, and that our connection to other people is a vital part of being human, and how we, now everybody has different opinions about that.
Hmm.
Um,
So let's
However,
do this. Let's go back and let's reframe this in
mhm,
that transition period from teen to young adult. What might that experience be like based on this understanding?
well, I live with an 18-year-old, so
Okay, so you have
I
direct in the
yeah,
moment experience.
in the moment experience with that. His I watched him, one, experience a sense of isolation, that, and a being cut off from his peer set in a way that many generations haven't seen. Um, However, I've also seen him refine his definition of what a friend is, not only in what he wants from friendship, but what he gives to friendship.
Hmm.
There's a consciousness of how to value connection that you would I that I wouldn't expect. And I see this in my patients that are my acupuncture patients that are
I
teenagers
think that's
too.
Ripple. That's a stage of maturation that's been seems to be more available to the younger crowd because of the forced
Well,
conditions.
you become aware of something by its absence sometimes,
Oh yeah, yeah.
right? And so I think there was a taking for granted that, oh yeah, one day I'll spend time with my friends. I got to do all this work stuff, and then I'll play when I retire. I'll do, I'll put this off. I'll postpone joy.
Hmm.
And I think there's a renewed understanding that I need all of that stuff. I need those connections with people that I care about. I need to find joy in what I'm doing to be a whole person for what I'm doing in the world.
Hmm.
Um, and I think, I mean, in every, you could, as with everything, all humans are unique, and there's pockets of, things that will contradict what I'm saying.
Yeah, well,
Um,
we're all unique and
and
we're all the same too. The basic
true.
desire, I believe, and I think it's true, and I'm looking for being proved wrong. Our basic desire is simply to love and be loved.
Mhm. And to belong, and to belong.
Yeah.
Um, and And I think that's also something that's been lost. I mean, also having been raised by people that were born in 1917 and 1920,
Mm.
and living in the house with my grandparents who were born in the 1800s, um, it I was very aware of what community meant to them was different than what community meant to my siblings, which was different than what community meant to my peers.
Right.
And I, and with people, people being able to move further away for work, people, there wasn't the, you're still living around people that knew you when you were a kid, which has its pluses and minuses, for in many cases.
Well,
And
yeah.
I think that we're returning to an understanding that community is what will save us. The rampant individualism is absolutely a part of American culture, and
It's a pendulum
I'm
swing.
yeah, it's a pendulum swing back to community, and I think community also will um help smooth the edges of this us and them conversation. It will help lower the fight or flight response in people. If they have back to the mycelium, if they know, if they feel if they feel the ripples in the force, if they know
Mhm.
that there are other people out there
Right.
always, and that they're not in it all on their own.
And that seems to be present. I mean, we became the octopus movement came out of that.
Mm-hmm.
Live and Let Live global peace movement that I'm operations director of came out of
I
that
love that.
period.
Mhm.
We have the friendship bench that is run by Biz Catalyst. That came out of that. There's other virtual groups of what seem to be people looking for each other.
Yeah. Well, and even the in-person things like the human library
Sure.
that are all over, just the richness of that
Hmm.
is, I think, really coming more to the forefront.
Well, and that's part of the trend, right?
Right.
The sequestration caused the virtual world to pop
Right. Oh,
or
completely. Yeah.
explode.
Hmm. Yep.
And now it's like, okay, we've been out there, and now let's bring it back in here and have the, person to person, face to face.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because now I find, I mean, because I see people in person, I see people online, I
Mhm.
have phone calls with people. I find phone calls to be the most intimate way to talk to somebody. It's really interesting to me, to go back to that. And, I mean, I'm of the generation that grew up with, phones tied to the wall and laying in the same spot on the floor for
Right.
for
Right.
an
Yeah,
hour
me
while you
too.
talk to somebody. And and there was something about being able to carry a phone in your pocket all the time and be reached. But on the other hand, there's a beauty to not being findable and then to be found. And
Yes.
with phone calls now, I find that it's just a much more intimate conversation. And it's
Why do
because,
you think that is?
um, well, first of all, it's there's a slowing down to a phone call that doesn't happen. Like with the Zoom, it's like, okay, there's a clock on your computer that tells you how long you've been talking to somebody, and and you have
Right.
that other thing that's in your calendar that's in your head, and whatever.
Sure, sure.
And if you're meeting in person, there, if it's in the form of like working with my acupuncture patients, then I've got another patient coming or whatever. Or if it's meeting somebody for lunch, then they have to get back to work, or there are other mitigating external factors that are in our heads when it's happening.
Hmm.
Whereas if it's a phone call connection, aside from like, somebody calling to say, by the way, your dentist appointment is next week, that's a different thing. But like if there's a like if you and I were having this conversation on the phone, time would stretch in a way that it does when we talk regardless, but there's an added piece to it. There's an added expansion to it. And I think it's because there's in the same way that I would be I find rejuvenation in darkness.
Hmm.
It's the sensory thing. It's a phone call is you're dealing with one sense.
Might
You're
we,
connecting with somebody with one sense.
yeah, it's like a deep listening.
Yes.
There's not sight, so you're not distracted. And I don't know if you talk with your eyes closed or you look around the room.
Sometimes I do.
Oftentimes it's like, you just sit and you close your eyes and you just talk to somebody and you kind of cascade into that world.
Hmm.
What,
Well, and it's because you're not in the same room and you're not visually in contact with the person.
right. Well, and
It's
there's no other sensory things to involve other than
right.
their voice. And their voice carries all their energy.
And for me at least,
Hmm.
I'm aware that they are elsewhere. Like right
Sure.
now, you're on my computer. So technically you're right here in front of me,
Oh, so let's
my
dance.
experience. Yeah, in my experience of this, right?
Yeah.
But when I'm on the phone, there
There's
I'm
distance.
aware that they're somewhere
Yeah.
else on the planet. I'm talking to
Right.
someone.
Oh,
It's
and you
I don't
make a
know.
good point too about how close this kind of conversation makes you feel,
Hmm.
right? Like distance disappears,
Yep. Yep.
time disappears. We're in a different time zone that we don't care, right?
Yeah.
We're here now.
Right. Right.
So there's in comparison and contrasting that, there's the distance and still being in the now of which that evolving voice that comes from nothingness, right? You're listening
Hmm.
to it, paying attention, so you kind of go in there. Whereas this, it's more external.
Hmm.
That there's an interactive in that fashion rather than internal. It's still internal,
Right.
right? And yet we have that added factor of the visual that um, because of it sometimes opens up and depending on the purpose for the conversation, right?
Right.
Like in you and I when with clients, they'd be to read micro expressions,
Right.
right? To make sure
Right.
that the body and the brain and all of
Yes.
that is congruent. Because if it's
Hmm.
not, it's going to show up in the micro expressions.
Hmm. Well, and it's also, and that's also why I do this work of helping people be in all of their body,
Hmm.
even when they're online, so that they're not they're not only aware of being seen and seeing, that they can rest back into their body in a way that doesn't that's not as exhausting, quite frankly.
Sure,
Um, in the
sure.
same way that you would if you're just listening to something.
Absolutely. Now, back to that swirling around and going
Mhm.
back to at least one question and how do you see this obsession on self-hygiene and sequestration affecting how we are looking at the future and the opportunities of co-creation that take place by seeing it that way? And we're all looking for
Well,
an
I
answer.
mean,
What's that going to be?
I think part of it is that now we it's not unrealistic to partner with somebody on the other side of the planet with something.
Mhm.
It's the the whole internet connection, and particularly video conferencing in any on whatever format you're on, allows for an immediacy of connection with somebody anywhere on the planet,
Mhm.
or even really technically in the space station if you're if you've got the right,
Sure.
you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, and so that
But then you've got the
expands.
culture and language, even though it's English,
Sure.
the listening is from different places because of how they've learned it.
Right. Exactly. And I think that opens up possibilities that wouldn't normally happen, for friendships, for businesses, for spiritual experiences. I have a patient who her entire synagogue is online, and there are people from all over the world that are part of it. And how that will change and she talks about how that it changes the experience with that many different perspectives from that many geographies, changes the experience of what is a regular, what if it was in a local community would be
Hmm.
um more of people the same, you
Right.
know. And
Yep.
so I think that also my hope, I do believe this is happening, is that it allows people it's a simultaneous understanding of everyone is unique and accepting other, and a right next to, and we are all getting from birth to death the best way we know how, and we're
Hmm.
doing this in community. And so I think it's
Which
a simultaneous.
causes the need for a bit of forgiveness in the process because we're all
Correct.
just trying to figure it out.
Hmm. Yep.
And
My
now, does it, do you find that in this, it occurred to me as you were talking about the synagogue, because the basis of Judaism is questioning,
Yep.
right? The curiosity. Do you find that people are, because oftentimes we retard our curiosity in asking questions of things that we think we might understand, but we don't want to appear stupid if we don't,
Right.
right? Do you see that changing and the curiosity of striving not to have miscommunication? Do you see that changing?
I, I think so. I think there's a push me pull you conversation in there,
Hmm.
because I think the fact that, I don't know how many times, again, with my teenager, we'll Google it. Let's look it up. Well, not Google. Go it. Let's look,
Right.
let's uh
Either,
let's look it up. Ask the
divide,
internet. Ask the
yeah,
internet.
right.
And I think
Ask
um
God, the
yeah,
giver of data.
yes. I'm stealing that. Um but the trap there is that, um well, back to an example for my 18-year-old.
Right.
He follows a lot of YouTubers. He was following this one guy that did a lot of history uh work and really in-depth stuff, and he'd been following him for years and really liked his work, and had like followed up on, some of it that had spurred him to go dig into deeper holes about different things. and
Hmm.
and he ran across a video of his that made him question everything he'd learned from this guy. And it was that he held the um, Bloody Sunday in Ireland. He gave it more coverage than he did the colonization of the African continent. And my son was like, "This is not." And so he suddenly started digging back into, and now he is going back and relearning, like finding other sources and looking things up and doing
Oh,
actual
that's
research
awesome.
and all these other topics. But I
Right.
don't think, he's a little bit of a weirdo. So I don't think that, I say that with all the love in my heart. And
Sure.
I do not think that, I think the risk in this instant access to information is, I think our, as a species,
It's an
our,
interesting dance partner.
yeah, I think our curiosity wants to know right away, but I think our deeper curiosity is being overlooked in many cases. And I think that's where communication and forgiveness and reconciliation of opposing views gets hamstrung, because of this. I'm going to believe this, without being,
Sure.
without the,
Sure.
I'm curious about this topic. I found this information. It seems credible. I'm going to believe this. But there's not a deeper curiosity of, how did that person get it?
Sure.
Where did
Sure.
that come from?
And in the framework, in our desire to love and be loved, there's a certain belief and willingness to trust and
Right.
believe what we are told initially.
Yes.
And
Yes.
yet, you got guys like Howard Bloom now that wrote the Lucifer Principle, a decade or so ago, at least, maybe two. And he says that, okay, here's the story of our history, folks. A few people manipulate populations by telling lies and controlling the media stream.
Right. Right. Well, and
So then we've got to step back and go, huh, what if that's true? What might I need to question now?
right. Well, and history's told by the victor, right?
Yeah,
So, so, and that's why I love Howard Zen's work, is that he goes in and says, yes, but all these other stories were going on while this story was being told. And, um, yeah. So I think it's
It's that
on the one
circle.
hand, yeah,
Perfect. I got to share this. This is so cool. In the circle, right? We see it as a two-dimensional object,
right.
right? However, it's made up of points
Hmm.
that make the line. Well, what are those points? Are those points perhaps the end of a spiral
Right.
from another that then collectively come in to make that circle?
Hmm.
And we just can't see it because we're looking at it two-dimensionally. We're not looking at it three-dimensionally, let alone four-dimensionally.
Yeah. When I was a kid, that makes me think. I I am now, as I say, I say I'm a Taoist and a recovering Southern Baptist. Um, and there was a book that was seminal in the way that I think, and my father actually turned me onto it, um, called Mr. God, This Is Anna. And it's about this little girl, and it's very Christian. But there's a moment that sticks with me from that she takes a she she got a projector from some like a slide projector from somebody,
Mhm.
and she was taking pictures of people. She was having people stand up against a big piece of paper, and she'd draw their outline, and then she'd take the piece of paper and she'd turn it sideways, and it would become a line when she put it through the projector, and then she would turn the line sideways, and it would become a point, and how everybody was really just a point, and we were all points in this larger picture.
Oh, I got to share this, and you've heard me talk about this before, but this brings it up again. When I had my enlightening experience as a teen, I'd prayed
Mhm.
to know what truth was. I was willing to die for it as necessary. When I was asked if I was willing to believe or willing to die for what I believed in, I had to, it's like, oh, what do I believe in?
Right.
Landed on cosmic consciousness. And in so doing, I was given experience of it, which
Mhm.
I saw points of light surrounding me, and I knew those points were points of consciousness, whether
Mhm.
in body or not, I wasn't sure because I wasn't at the time,
Right.
but I had a sense that they were. So when upon returning into my body, along with carrying the effervescent, iridescent, high-pitched sensation that I felt there
Yeah.
back into my body, I also was immediately aware that we are all cosmic consciousness condensed into form, just
Yep.
unaware. And that kind of validates that point, right?
Hmm.
That point is infinitesimally large and
Yes.
infinitesimally small
Mhm.
at
Well,
the
the
same moment.
well, the way I describe it, thinking in terms of chi and energy,
Mhm,
um, is that we're all ice cubes floating in water, and and we have concretized into this person,
mhm.
and then we will melt back into the everything. My I keep telling stories about my son. He probably he might not appreciate that, but um,
Low-hanging fruit, right?
yes, he is, and he's also a great teacher for me.
Oh, good.
Um, when he was when he was about 3 years old, we went to the science center, just a field trip for the kid, and they were showing in the IMAX dark matter,
Mm.
a thing about dark matter. And he's like, I want to go, and I'm like, Deacon, I'm not sure I'm going to understand what this is. I don't think. He's like, no, I want to go. So we went, and we sat through this whole thing, and it was interesting, and I got some of it, and I was stretching my brain a little bit to hold some of it. And anyway, we get out, we wander around the science center, we go home, we're riding home, and from his car seat in the back, he says, I think I figured it out. I'm like, oh, okay, what's that? What have we figured out? And he's like, I think I figured out dark matter. And I'm like, okay. Now, bear in mind, he's the child of an acupuncturist, so he's been raised like being able to
Sure,
find
sure, sure.
acupuncture
Yeah,
points
well,
and
he's
be able
got
to
the
use them.
foundation from which to launch, right?
Right, right. We like to say at his house, because my husband is a self-taught Linux administrator. We like to say that he was raised trilingual, Linux, Chinese medicine, and English.
Right.
Um, but he's sitting back there and he says, yeah, he says, I think dark matter is the chi of all the people and the animals and the plants. And um, a drop comes down every time something new is created. But then when we die, it all goes back up and helps hold the universe together. And I was like, okay.
That's really astute. And both in that presentation and as a 3-year-old, he's going to absorb all of that. Is going to be a file in his repository that will, unconsciously probably, but he'll reflect on it throughout his life.
Yeah.
And
Although now,
obviously has.
well, when he hears me tell the story now, he's like, yeah, but mom, now science is saying that dark matter and the event horizon does this, and I'm like, yeah, okay, sure, I
Sure.
gotcha.
Well, his
Yes,
adulting,
he's
right?
adulting
It's
right now. Yes,
happening. And so in the adulting process, we want to kind of deny everything we knew as a kid for at least a
right,
short time.
sure, sure, yeah,
But
yeah.
what if we didn't?
Oh, whew, I'm not sure we'd be prepared, but yeah, no, I mean, what if he didn't? What if we? And I think he holds on to some of that more than some of his peers, at least. But I do think his generation
Sure.
is
Well, what about those, the weird,
okay.
weird, crazy, insane ones that we were talking about earlier that have this experience but can't talk about it,
Yes.
right? How would that be incorporated into this awareness, this experience, and what might they, being one yourself,
Hmm.
um, tend to see, feel, experience that needs a little nurturing so that they don't totally whack out over it? Because these kinds of things, when they first appear, they usually come from because of some kind of trauma, some kind of disconnection.
Hmm.
Then we say, oh, but I really want to be connected,
Right.
right? You have to feel that, like you were saying earlier, we don't really appreciate till we lose it, or
Yeah.
don't know that it's there until
Yeah.
it's missing.
It's known by its absence. Yeah.
Yeah. So understanding that, how in the transition period, which is pretty tumultuous, what was it like for you, and how did that hmm, resident wisdom come about?
I don't know if I can tell you how it came about. What I can tell you is that it um because I was raised by extremely curious parents, um I was pretty much and by very forward thinking, he would never have defined himself as a feminist, but a very forward thinking feminist father,
Hmm.
um, who who never wanted one of his daughters to ever be, dependent or left flat footed,
Sure.
um, by being abandoned. Um, I was raised to believe not only to be curious, but also to be always focused on the possible or possibly the impossible and seeing if it could become possible. Um, rather than, I mean, what is needed to be dealt with, but then what's possible
Yeah,
needed
what
to be
can be?
needed to be pursued. And so, um, I think,
How'd you
right.
navigate that?
Well, I mean, it's because I think of things as a puzzle. I think of I've always sort of addressed life as a puzzle. Like, what part of me do I bring forth into the situation that will move it forward or lead to what I'm looking for or
Hmm.
lead to what somebody else needs or and
So if
and
we were looking from a DSM perspective, would that be MPD?
I don't even know what those letters mean, so I can't answer that question.
Well, multiple personality disorder. See, that's what they label. This is
Ah,
the clinical side of things that weird, insane, crazy
mhm,
people like us.
mhm,
If we get into that system, that's what we have to address, or how we are addressed in that system, because it's bereft of the understanding of what's going on inside.
I don't know. I wouldn't think of it in terms of that. I mean, I think
Having been there, that's just one of the places I go to.
sure, sure. Um, I mean, for me, it's more like having a deck of cards of all my skills, and I don't need to be able to call a good show in the middle of an acupuncture treatment. I don't need to be able to
Right.
design a bookcase door while,
Sure.
gardening or,
It's about making sense, right?
yeah,
Continuity.
right. Well, and it's about having a deck of cards and deciding which one to play. right?
Mhm.
It's not I I don't need to be exercising my uh political skills while playing with a 5-year-old. I mean, there's just
Sure.
and so it's really an application of skills or an applic and which, my son my son tells me is masking my weirdness. But
Well, if
I
you
think
know your skill set, it would seem, right, as you grow in self-awareness
mhm,
and self-examination to become more aware,
right.
then you begin to understand the skill sets that you have intuitively,
Mhm.
internally, however you want to call it. And now there's also assessments that
Oh,
you
there's
can,
1,000 ways as that. Yes.
right, to
I
get a reflection of, okay, am
mhm,
I seeing myself as I am? And so you've got all these other self-assessment tools to look at or
right.
reflect from. They may not be 100% correct, but from all of the, oh gosh, dozens I've taken,
Yeah.
there's nuggets in each one of them that go,
Oh,
ooh, ooh, look at
yeah.
this, you missed it, or there's a soothing, yeah, you're just built this way and it's okay.
Right. You don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
The best assessment I've done was not one that you take. It's we had to do it in acupuncture school.
Hmm.
I think I told you about this. We before going into clinic, we had to ask everybody we knew what they were aware of, either by its absence or its presence whenever we were in the room. We could be mad, we could be sick, we could be happy, we could be asleep. But what were they
That's
aware of?
powerful.
Well, it's also kind of brutal, depending
Well,
on who.
sure.
And
Well,
but the
truth can be brutal.
true,
It depends on whether you're willing to listen with an open heart or a closed mind.
right. And the purpose of this exercise was to know what we would bring into the treatment room regardless.
Hmm.
Um, Now, prior to this exercise, my big concern going to clinic was, how am I going to get these people to trust me? I don't know what I'm doing. I've never, I'm
Right.
new at this. How will I,
Yeah.
come off as competent, blah,
Flares
blah,
of
blah.
the imposter syndrome, right?
Complete. Well, and also just newbie syndrome,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
know. And uh, but with all of the with all of the information that came in and help from my classmates in crafting it, um, it became what we called in my acupuncture school my promise in being.
Hmm.
And my promise in being is that I, Janice Campbell, promise that no matter what, no matter where I am, life will show up as forthrightness, flexibility, and belonging, which immediately took off the table my having to worry about whether or not these people were going to trust me,
Sure.
because all the rapport skills that I was worried about, I'm already bringing into the room. Then I could go and worry about things like needling and point location and all that other stuff that I needed to worry about.
Sure. Well, you
Um,
go from the gross to the fine.
right. And it's not just that those are my superpowers, because they are. It's also they're some of my worst fault. I mean, it's both sides of the coin, right? So there are
Truth has
probably,
paradox, right?
well, there's less than a handful that I can think of anyway, of people that I have decided did not belong anywhere near me.
Hmm.
And I could be in a room of 600 people and you could be on the other side of the room. And if I have made this decision, you would know. Um, and
Well, and you bring up a good point of how sensitive we are naturally. I mean, you can
right.
walk into a room and when you are aware of this, and
Mhm,
maybe even not, just as an experiment, you can center yourself and be in a place of calm in a semi-chaotic room. And if you focus in that place for a, a few moments,
mhm.
the room will change.
Oh yeah. I played that game. I play that game at Christmas party.
Hmm.
I because well,
Because you could to begin with,
because I
right?
can, but also because seasonally we have a habit of trying to act like it's high summer in the middle of winter. And
Right.
so I will go to a Christmas party and I will drop all of my energy into my hips and my feet. I will become very quiet internally. This does not mean that I'm not telling a funny story. This does not mean that I'm not engaging with people, but I'm doing it in a staring at a campfire sort of way, not in a high pool party sort of way.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's always interesting to me to see how many people come over and sit by me and be like, it's so peaceful over here. And it's only because I'm like sending out quiet
Right.
that allows them to then come and take quiet, and which is what we should be doing in the
Sure.
dark time of
Now, this
year.
has to do with what many call the aura, right?
Yeah.
Your energy field. One of the things I was taught young was it was an amazing experiment of how she shared this. It was a woman that was trained in the Huna way, and she was teaching how to measure your aura using dowsing rods. Makes sense,
Yeah.
right? Is there?
Yeah.
So I show up early. We're in a 40-foot square room. She said, I say, okay, how do you do this? And she said, let me show you. And I'm like, cool, right? That was what I was hoping for.
Right.
So she says, here's what I want you to do. Close your eyes, focus in I'm going to have you close your eyes, focus in the past, the present, and the future. And then we're going to measure the size of your aura with the rods. I'm going to clear them on the other side of the room. I'm going to walk towards you. They'll open. I'm going to stop, have you open your eyes. We'll mark this spot, and this will demonstrate what I'm talking about. I'm like, okay, cool. So she gets in the opposite corner of the room, sticks me in the other one, and has me go to the past, the future, comes up, marks the spot, and then she hands me a rock on the windowsill and says, here, focus on this. And I do. And she does her thing again. And the amazing thing is the past and future opened about 6 feet in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
The present opened about she only got 2 steps in from the other side of the room.
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
it went from approximately 6 feet to about 50 feet
Mm-hmm.
without practicing.
Right. Right.
So imagine what can happen if you practice or you become
Mm-hmm.
aware and you accept that that's a viable opportunity to help you change the environment you're in if
Yep.
it is uncomfortable to you or uncomfortable to others.
Right. Well, and that overlays into that proprioceptory mycelial connection,
Exactly.
right? All the same thing. Yeah.
Yes,
Well, and the thing that I give people, when because they always, some people come to see me because their shoulder hurts and they want me to only make that point stop hurting,
sure. Right.
and this whole energy hooey thing that I do is, I have to give them examples. Sometimes I'll teach them how to find an acupuncture point. But oftentimes what I'll say is the next time you're in a room, stare at somebody across the room, just casually, look at them just casually, but keep your attention on them and see how long it takes for them to turn around and look at you.
Hmm.
I said, or the next time you're aware of somebody looking in your direction and you turn and you see that they're looking, you'll feel it
Right.
before you see
Yeah.
it.
Go talk to them.
Yeah, 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 exactly. But
That's your sign. There's a
so
connection there, right?
which comes back to the elephant thing of, every, everybody has that skill. It's just a matter of being able to sense it. And also everybody's, what's perceived as an angry rampaging elephant, once you start talking to it, actually can become a very positive um skill set or opportunity for change and growth, or
Sure.
a way of, you know,
And that's
creating more
often because
inclusion.
you're willing to hear or experience them, and
Right.
that soothes the savage beast.
Absolutely. One of the
Speaking of,
examples. Oh, good.
you were going to give an example. This is so
What
much fun. We can just banter forever, right?
I know.
It's
Um,
such a wonderful way to converse.
absolutely. Um, what I was going to say is that on a more intimate and sort of clinical space, um, I was in the teaching clinic. I was supervising in the teaching clinic in acupuncture, and two students came in. They were working with a patient, and they were absolutely certain that her anger was what was causing some of her physical problems. And and according to textbooks, it was true.
Hmm.
And and they had all the signs and symptoms, and her pulses were demonstrating it, and all these things. And I came in, and and I'm listening to her pulses, and I'm talking to her for a minute. And the situation that was going on in her life at the time was that her husband had cheated on her,
Mm.
and she was contemplating the end of the relationship, and she was theoretically pissed off. And
Well,
and
that's the first place you go, right? You get
well,
hurt, you get pet, then you get pissed off.
maybe, maybe. And I walked in and I looked at her and I said, and she was like, about the whole thing. And then she just stopped and she quit making noise while I listened to her pulses. And I looked at her and I said, ah, you're not angry, you're heartbroken.
Hmm.
Poof, everything shifted. Because oftentimes what we do too is we allow our more forceful emotions, whether it's anger or in some people's cases, joy, act as watchdogs for our more vulnerable emotions.
Hmm.
And I had a good friend who, for the longest time, was like just the life of the party and always, and always up and somewhat exhausting to be around sometimes. Um, and it was his joy acting as the guard for for other things. And um, so even that becomes that elephant that, like, once it's named, is like, okay, thank you. That doesn't need to happen anymore.
Right.
Let's deal with what is, or what, and let's see if we can't move it into what's possible
Yeah.
rather than the
Speaking
other way.
about what is, we are just running out of time. And wow, we stepped into that timelessness space
Yes,
and the
we did.
bubble that it's just been so enjoyable. Janice, I,
Mhm.
I appreciate your insight, your intelligence, your wisdom, and just how we can talk together,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. Yeah,
We're
it's very
so
fun.
um, capable of doing so and stepping into that. Speaking of stepping into, um, as folks are stepping into their stuff
Right.
and needing transcendence, what kind of, moment to moment or daily activity or tasty tidbit can you offer that, based on what you've shared so far, that might be able to help others in those moments of quandary to take a step up instead of sideways or sideways if necessary?
Stop and become aware of the back of your head.
Say
And
it
then
again.
stop and become aware of the back of your head.
Ah,
And then let that awareness move all the way down through your entire back body. Like, expand, not just move, but expand into your entire back body and allow yourself to rest back into that, which will also bring with it quiet. So that it's a little bit like what I call my magic 8 ball form of treatment planning. When I
hmm.
don't know what I'm going to do, when I'm not led in a particular direction, I do that. And then whatever needs to be done, or whatever point needs to be used, or whatever thing needs to be done in my online work will go bloop to the top of my head. And
Hmm.
then I'll go look at it and say, oh, that's interesting. I never would have. But allowing that deeper space, both both physically and spiritually, mentally, however you want to call it, energetically,
It affects everything.
allowing yourself to become aware of that deepening space in yourself, that quiet in yourself, will allow, and don't try to be quiet. Send your attention down through your back so that you become quiet.
But yeah, if you try to be quiet, that's only going to produce a fight because you're
Right,
going to
or
be,
lots of bouncy thoughts or
yeah,
whatever.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's usually what results, is the
Sure.
bouncy thoughts and just
Right.
watch it, but that focus and essentially become the observer and then
Mhm.
deepen that awareness.
Right. And I actually have a little 5 minute um audio on my website that guides people through that if they want that too. So,
Awesome. And we'll have that below the video in the
mhm.
description, as
Excellent.
well as contact information for you.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
wonderful. And Janice, thank you so much.
Mhm.
It seems like every time we talk, it's like the world expands even more,
Yeah.
right?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And the thing that I particularly like about our conversations is that even though we're preaching to the choir, um, the or
Perhaps.
well, perhaps the orchestration of the music that the choir's singing gets bigger. And
Mhm.
that's what I love about our conversations, is that I'm always led to think about something differently or more expansively. And
Wow.
that's always so much fun.
That's very humbling. Thank you.
You're
Uh,
welcome.
and namaste and
Namaste.
in la catch. And thank you for sticking with us for this episode of One World in a New World. I'm your host, Zen Benefiel, I think, and I'll see you next time.
Take care.
All right. Bada bing.